steals her heart.
You could just tell he had life together, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
But her marriage to Cy Ghosh turns into a crash course in criminal behavior.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved.
Police tell her, well, he hasn't done anything illegal yet. There's not much we can do.
And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
Amanda's life is on the line as she tries to shield her family from becoming his victims.
This behavior can't go on forever. Whether it's the victims or it's the perpetrator, something's got to give.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window.
Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
My mom and dad were married in Michigan and divorced when I was 2. So I really don't know my parents to have had a relationship together, but they were really good co-parents. And then when I turned probably around 12 or 13 years old, my mom graduated from X-ray school and we moved to Texas for work. I found myself being very alone in the beginning, especially through middle school. But we made it, and I don't think you could pay me to go back now. I graduated high school in '99, and I wanted to be a police officer. I'm not quite sure what motivated me to go down that route. I've always been kind of a square, never been a rule pusher or breaker, so it was just kind of a fit for me.
In 2002, 21-year-old Amanda Siggers is in her second year studying criminal justice at San Jacinto College in Houston, Texas.
I was a young girl that had the world at my fingertips, really. I was having a decent time with my friends, exploring the city and just living life. One day, a friend and I were preparing for a test, and we chose to go to a local bookstore, coffee shop, and study. We happened to look over, and there was this guy sitting at an adjacent table. He was very handsome. After a while, conversation ensued with him.
25-year-old Cy Ghosh tells Amanda and her friend that he works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, but intends to go back to school.
Cy had told me that he graduated from UT with a pre-med degree. He applied to get into Baylor College of Medicine, and he was accepted, but he denied the acceptance and ended up venturing into something else. He eventually got both of our phone numbers, and I thought for sure he was gonna call her, but he ended up calling me. And I was ecstatic. The beginning of our relationship was very fun. Cy was very much a gentleman from the word go, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
He was very, very polite, very cordial, pretty much like Amanda had told me. He was a tall, handsome man, and I knew that she was, she was very smitten.
Culturally, he was very different from me. I found him to be very interesting. Even though he was raised here in the United States, he had a lot of Eastern values. His parents were first-generation Indians. I got to learn a lot about the temples and just the peaceful nature of Hinduism. It's such a beautiful culture. He told me that his father and mother were divorced, and prior to us getting together, he had moved out of his father's home and into his mother's home. He was very uncomfortable at his mother's house. She would consistently be on him, nagging him about something, mostly his career, because in that culture, career and education is number one. They generally live in the home for quite some time, even after college, in an effort to save as much money as possible. And so he was, staying in the house even at an older age because that's culturally just what was of the norm for them. Cy's mother's name is Lipika. She was very much about money, prestige. She didn't care for the union between Cy and I. He relayed that message to me, and I feel like she wanted him to marry an Indian woman and not a white woman. But we chose to look past it. 3 months later, she realized that he was serious about me because he actually brought me home, and we ended up staying the night there. and she opened up the door, and I was there. She shut the door very fast, and Cy had to go put that fire out. She was very vocal about me being a white bitch, and she didn't want that white bitch staying the night in her house. It was certainly a shock, but I knew that he wasn't going to listen to that. I knew how he felt about me, but it was very hurtful. We ended up leaving, and I don't believe I ever stayed the night there again.
Cy's dad, on the other hand, welcomes Amanda with open arms.
Cy's father, his name is Biz. I did not feel like he was racially against me or us being together. I felt like he genuinely wanted to see us succeed in life. He was just a very kind soul.
In late 2002, Biz asks his son and Amanda to come live with him and his current wife, Kay. He has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wants to spend his last days with his son.
The first few weeks were good. Kay was on board with everything. She knew that we were there to help and not to hinder. But then it started to decline. I could tell that there was tension between Kay and Cy. Cy went on to tell me that Kay would say false things about him. Eventually, it felt like I was walking on eggshells everywhere I went. One evening, Kay cornered me. She said, "You have no idea the person that you're getting involved with. You have no idea who he is, and I would highly encourage you to stay away." At the time, I thought, whatever, I'm in love, and he's so good to me, and he has nothing good to say about her, so it tainted my ability to really take her seriously.
Despite the tension, all three focus on caring for Biz. Until his death in July of 2003, Cy is inconsolable.
He was devastated. Biz was a primary force in his life, and once he passed, I think that Cy felt empty. I think he felt scared. Very different, mentally very different.
Things come to a head when Amanda finds something suspicious in Cy's car.
I found a box of condoms, and it prompted a lot of questions. He became defensive, and it led to a horrific argument, and I started to get a little bit scared. And I had attempted to make a phone call, and he ripped the phone out of the wall. So I made my way to the front door, and I pushed the panic button on the alarm, which immediately sends a call to 911. So I knew that they were on the way, and he knew they were on the way as well, and he left. So the police showed up, and I let them know what had transpired. I did not press charges. It was hours later that he came back, and I vividly remember just being so upset that he was gone, not knowing what was going to transpire, if we were breaking up.
Cy begs Amanda's forgiveness, and Amanda rationalizes that he is deeply grieving and not acting like himself.
I forgave him, and we just chose to ultimately put it behind us. I had a lot of big hopes for our relationship, and I wanted things to be normal again. So I just made it okay. And we were fine. We were fine after that.
In 2005, Amanda and Cy decide to take the next big step.
I was very happy for my daughter to get married. She was very happy about getting married.
And by this time, Cy's mom has accepted Amanda into her son's life.
So we had a Hindu ceremony at the Meenakshi temple, and 2 days later we had the Christian ceremony. My family came to the Hindu ceremony. I had to wear a red sari, red and gold. It was absolutely beautiful.
The highlight was when I saw them walking towards the limousine to spend the rest of their lives together. That's the way it was supposed to work.
I felt like my dreams were coming true. We were in forward motion.
Cy applies to medical school, and life seems on track. Until he does an about-face and pressures Amanda to change her career.
It came out of left field for sure. He was very adamant that being a police officer, that was a blue-collar job. It wasn't acceptable to him or his family, and he made it very clear that it was not where he saw his life going.
Instead, he wants her to go into healthcare as well.
I was to go through nursing school, and we were going to open and run a practice together. In theory, it was the fairy tale. I caved in because I felt like he knew better than I did. He was 5 years older than me, and he had a plan.
Cy chooses a podiatry school in Des Moines, Iowa, and Amanda gets accepted into a nearby nursing school.
When they moved to Iowa, they were about 10 hours closer to Michigan, I think, so I could see them more often. I would take the train over, help her decorate, and I loved doing it. As a father, it was great for me to be able to do that.
But Amanda doesn't adapt well to her new field of study.
Well, I was in a clinical setting one day, and I ended up passing out. And that's when my professor pulled me to the side and said, you know, you may want to rethink your career choice.
She said, Dad, I really want to do it. But she knew that she couldn't do it because she couldn't stay on the side of blood, so.
Amanda decides to withdraw from the program.
When I told Cy, he didn't react well. He made it very clear that he was embarrassed by my decision. He told me he was very disappointed and that I needed to do it. I stood my ground, that I wanted to do something else. And ultimately, he had called me white trash and bitch and wished that I was dead. That's when I realized that I had made a mistake.
When Amanda Ghosh quits nursing school, her husband Cy becomes verbally abusive.
But I'm a loyal soul. I'm very loyal to my mate. And I chose to stay. I didn't think that there wasn't anything that we couldn't fix. I took my vows, my marriage vows, very seriously.
Amanda forges ahead despite Cy's disapproval.
I took all of my criminal justice and nursing courses and wrapped it into a general studies degree, basically the highest level associate degree you can get from a junior college, and I moved on. But I didn't feel proud of that accomplishment, actually. Cy belittled me because it wasn't good enough, and so I felt like a failure.
And I felt that there was things going on that I didn't know about, which relayed into their marriage some friction.
He definitely made me feel devalued. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I missed my family.
And then, a call from out of the blue brings family directly into Amanda's life in an unexpected way.
Amber was my half-sister. She was born to my dad and my stepmom, Joyce. She was 4 years younger than me, almost to the day. The only sister I've ever had. And as she got older, she became dependent on drugs. We went our separate ways.
While struggling with addiction, 21-year-old Amber gives birth to a baby girl, Kelsey. When Kelsey is a few months old, Amber is ordered by a Michigan judge to enter rehab for 90 days.
The paternity had not been established on Kelsey. And I received a phone call from CPS asking me if I would be interested in doing a temporary foster placement for my niece. It was a no-brainer for me, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with Cy to bring her into the home, and he agreed.
In January of 2007, Amanda travels to Michigan to get her niece.
When I first saw Kelsey, she was only 11 pounds at 7 months old. I knew instantly that I was never going to give her back.
Amber was not capable of taking care of a child, but Amanda was, so I was happy that Kelsey was in a safe place.
I knew that I was on the path that God had laid out for me. She was a sickly baby due to being born addicted. She cried incessantly. It is very hard to deal with a baby that never stops crying, but somehow you figure out how to deal with it.
Amber didn't finish her rehabilitation, so the court awarded Amanda to keep taking care of Kelsey.
Even though he never said it, I think Cy felt like he had made a mistake. I think he quickly realized that the responsibility of a child was far more than he anticipated. Unfortunately, it wore Cy down over time. I was doing the laundry one day and the baby was crying. I walked around the corner and he was shaking her violently. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that he was doing what he was doing to such a tiny, fragile little baby. I was just blown away. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to leave. He has absolutely crossed the line. I need to get her out of there. He didn't deserve the title of being a dad.
In May 2007, Amanda moves back to Houston with Kelsey, leaving Cy behind in Iowa.
I was gonna take care of this baby. That was my mission. Why the career choices that I had made and why it didn't pan out. I knew that I was supposed to be Kelsey's mom. I was able to find a townhouse apartment right next door to my mom, which was extremely helpful because she was able to help me with the baby. I got a part-time job so that we could survive. Somehow we made it work. All of a sudden I became a single mom. We were divorced in December of 2008. He filed for divorce and it was uncontested. It was easy, 2-page divorce. I felt like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me at the same time. It was such a weird feeling.
Amanda enrolls in a sonography program for training in ultrasound.
I felt very confident. I found my independence. I was going to school and I was working full-time. Kelsey was going to daycare and thriving in daycare. We were happy. I was free of all of the dysfunction that I had lived in for so long.
But Amanda's newfound peace will not last for long.
So I moved back to Texas in December of 2009, early 2010. And that's when the stalking began.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved. This behavior can't go on forever. When is somebody gonna break?
Amanda Harris has moved on with her life, while Cy flounders.
Ironically enough, he decided that medical school wasn't quite right for him.
Cy drops out of podiatry, converts to Christianity, and returns to Houston.
One day he called me and told me that he had obtained a job at a pizza place near my apartment. And I thought, why in the world would he take a job delivering pizzas? And then it dawned on me that he could drive in and out of my apartment complex on the daily, on the hourly sometimes. I found it to be bizarre behavior.
He's a pizza delivery driver. Where being a law enforcement officer wasn't good enough for her, now he's going to drive and deliver pizzas, not because he wants to, but because it allows him to have the freedom to drive by and check on her whenever he wants to.
In early 2011, 2.5 years after her divorce, Amanda moves to a new home in a new neighborhood and doesn't share her address with Cy. It's a new beginning.
I was encouraged by my friends to get out there, so I put my profile up on an online dating site and I met Wayne.
Wayne Harris works in the motorsports industry and, like Amanda, is divorced with one child, a boy named Nick.
So I met up with him and he thought he was an attractive man and our conversations just flowed so well. I just knew right away. I was so ecstatic to feel this feeling again, to know that I was capable of feeling, you know, the joy, the butterflies again. And he was as well, that we just didn't miss a beat. We decided that we were gonna see each other the very next day, which turned into the very next day and every day thereafter, unless he was out of town for work.
And I thought he's just a fantastic guy. Real nice to be around, very energetic.
So Super Bowl Sunday rolled around, and Wayne came over that evening, and I was cooking, and I would oftentimes let Kelsey play at the park right there because I could see her. She's basically within arm's reach of me. So Kelsey's playing, Wayne and I are talking, and I get a knock at the door, and it's the police officer that lives on site. He had received a call from a concerned person letting them know that I let my child play outside unattended.
Amanda invites the officer inside to discuss it, embarrassed that her new boyfriend is a witness.
We all had conversation. Wayne had conversation with him. We were all in agreement that she was certainly within an eye shot, ear shot, arm shot of me, and that she was perfectly fine. I asked the officer who had made the call, and he couldn't tell me, but I knew in my gut who was at the root of this. I felt frustrated. I felt violated again. It's a very uneasy feeling to know you're being watched. At this point, my relationship is blossoming with Wayne, and I didn't let him know everything that was going on because I certainly didn't want to taint a good relationship with my baggage and drama. I didn't want to bring that into the relationship.
Amanda's strategy is to block Cy completely.
I figured he didn't get his way. Hopefully he'll move on now, but that never happened. And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
It has been 5 years since Amanda took custody of Kelsey. Now, as Amanda is on the verge of becoming Kelsey's legal mother, Cy starts to stir things up.
What he did is he cleverly went to a therapist, told the therapist all of his grievance toward me, and made me out to look like a neglectful mother. And it was her duty to call CPS by state law. I received a phone call from CPS that they were going to interview my daughter that day. I felt mortified, and as soon as she stepped foot in my door, she realized quickly that Kelsey was just fine.
I just couldn't believe that he did that. It was like, when does it stop?
Kelsey, the adopted daughter, is the reason she left him in the first place. So by calling CPS, if that worker had not done a thorough and proper investigation or had just rushed to judgment, then Amanda could have very easily lost Kelsey. And for all intents and purposes, her niece, who is now her daughter, is the most important thing she has. And it would have been devastating.
Concerned that Cy's unpredictable behavior is escalating, Amanda seeks help from the local police.
I don't think it's ever going to go away, and I honestly have no idea how to deal with it. I've gone to the police department at this point. I've talked to officers that have asked me to just ignore it, and as long as he doesn't put his hands on me, there's really nothing they can do. It's very frustrating. I felt horribly harassed, unprotected, and you feel so helpless.
Wayne steps up and asks Amanda and Kelsey to move in with him on the other side of Houston.
It was the best feeling. I felt Kelsey was going to have a great role model, a great father figure. Moving to the north side of town was good because I didn't know where I had gone. And so the stalking had come to a halt for a short period of time. Life was actually going really, really well.
It was very, very comforting to know that she was with somebody that was safe, and Kelsey too.
That all changes one night when Wayne is away on business.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window. I knew he was out there.
In 2012, in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Amanda Ghosh is awakened by gunshots outside her window.
I immediately called the police.
She did not see Cy shoot the gun, but she did see him get in the car. When that happened, well, that's when I really became concerned.
When they showed up, he wasn't there. They checked the perimeter of the home. They didn't find any shell casings. They spoke with the neighbors. None of the neighbors had heard any gunshots, and so I kind of felt like they didn't believe me, and it really went nowhere.
Amanda is on high alert, and it's not long before another incident occurs.
One night, Wayne and I were sitting in the living room watching TV, and our dog ran to the window and was barking his tail off. So I knew somebody was out there, and I had a feeling that it was Cy. Wayne hopped up quite angrily, and I encouraged him to just settle down for half a second, let me call the police and get them there this time so that they could witness what was going on. They were right around the corner, so it only took a couple of minutes, and they caught him there. Thank God. This time he had finally been caught, and they issued him a trespass violation and a warning. We actually felt good after that for a while. We didn't see him for quite some time after that.
With Cy in her rear view, Amanda commits to her bright future.
We decided to get married on 12/12/12 at 12/12 at the Justice of the Peace.
They were very, very happy. And in fact, at the time that they got married, they adopted Kelsey at the same time.
I had been fighting for custody of Kelsey for the better part of 7 years. It was quite the process, but we'd finally gotten there. And then 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant for Gemma.
It was great to see. Wayne wrote notes for the unborn baby for her to read later on and, when she grows up. So he was very, very excited about being a new father.
Gemma was born with a very, very rare condition called bacterial association. She was born with only one kidney, as well as no esophagus, a cardiac defect, and a vertebral defect. Needless to say, she required 24/7 attention, care.
She was a perfect little child. Of course, all of my grandkids were perfect. They are a blessing.
About a year and a half after Gemma was born, we moved into this beautiful home that neither one of us thought we would ever be able to live in. And here we achieved it. We were on top of the world at this point. Christmas Day 2015, we woke up rather early with the kiddos because they were just super excited. And we just sat down to open our gifts, and I hear a tap at the door. And who else but Cy?
Cy tells Amanda that he would like to pray with her and her 2 daughters.
I just couldn't believe that he even came back around, especially at a time when a family's getting together for Christmas.
Wayne came unglued that day. He escorted Cy off of our property with a lot of profanity and a lot of anger and aggression.
Cy's stalking has been going on for almost 6 years, ever since Amanda decided to leave him.
There are some individuals who cannot take no for an answer. They cannot move on and regain their sense of balance until they're back in control again. Maybe if Amanda were to run back to him and he could say, "No, I don't want you," then he would have control again and he could move on. Right now, none of the decisions are his, except the ones that he uses to torture and drive them crazy.
She is aware of Texas's strong stand your ground laws and asks the police for more information about self-defense.
So I asked the officer what my rights were. If I had the right to hold him at citizen's arrest until the police got there. He told me that we definitely had that right.
Wayne owns a gun and suggests Amanda buy one too.
Wayne encouraged me to go get my license to carry and buy a weapon to protect myself due to all of this incessant harassment, stalking. So I took a few classes and tried to become as capable with my weapon as possible. June 28th, 2017 was Kelsey's 11th birthday, and she chose to just have a she day. She chose to do all kinds of things like get her nails done, get her hair done, very girly stuff.
Amanda, Kelsey, and Kelsey's friend Georgia meet up with Wayne, his son Nick, and baby Gemma at Kelsey's favorite restaurant.
And after dinner, Gemma was exhausted, so I asked Wayne to take her back home so that I could finish shopping with Kelsey and her friend for her birthday. So he obliged and reached over and gave me a kiss, a really long kiss. The kids were in the background ewing. I'll forever remember it. I stayed at the mall with Georgia and Kelsey for probably about another hour. Kelsey asked me if her friend could stay the night, and I said sure. So all three of us went back to our home. And as I was rounding the corner of my street, I saw Cy on his hands and knees at my front door with Wayne pointing a gun at him. I knew immediately that I needed to protect my family. I reached into my glove box, I grabbed my gun, and I told the girls to sit down and not to move. I got out of the car, I held the gun in that direction, and I called the police.
Hi, I need a police officer as soon as possible. I'm
Hold on.
arrest right now.
You can't make a citizen's arrest.
Yes, I've already been informed that I can. I have an ongoing case against this person.
Ma'am.
Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
On June 28, 2017, Jennifer Provoznik is visiting friends who live down the street from where Amanda and Wayne live.
I work in law enforcement, and it's my day off, so I just wanted to really enjoy my day with my friends.
They are oblivious to the scene unfolding a couple of yards away.
My name is Amanda Harris. I've been down there many times to tell you guys what's going on. He's been told by the police to stay away hundreds of times.
Do you have a weapon right now?
My husband and I both have a weapon.
Okay, I'm going to need you to put that weapon up, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, you and your husband both.
Wayne, he wants you to put your weapon down.
Does this other male have a weapon?
I have no idea.
From inside the car, 11-year-old Kelsey also calls 911.
Send him over right now, please.
What's going on?
My mom's ex-husband, he literally stalks us and he's at our house right now. My parents are yelling at him right now with guns. I'm sorry. I'm just really scared.
Sorry, I'm getting out of you. Stay on the line.
And I hear 3 distinct gunshots and a woman screaming. So at this time, my training kicks in, and I told my friend, I was like, listen, call 911, I'm going down there.
I had been shot, but I didn't know it. It was all so surreal. I saw my husband fall to the ground out of the corner of my eye. And as I sat up from the position I was in, I was shot again. And I was laying between the 2 cars when I saw Cy's feet moving around the car and circle back to me. And when I looked up, he was holding a gun at my head, and he pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. I had been saved by the grace of God. It didn't fire. And some divine force picked me up, and I got to my feet and I ran for my life.
I see a woman running into the house and slamming the door. And then there's this guy just standing there in between 2 cars, looking around, and he looks right at me and then takes off running.
Cy Ghosh gets in a car and flees the scene.
And that's when a little girl gets out of the car. She looks at me and she starts screaming, "Save my daddy." And I look down, there's a body in the driveway. And I was like, listen, I said, there's a woman behind me. You take your friend. You do not stop till you get to her. Do you understand me? And she goes, yes. And so I sent her off at that point. I look at the individual on the ground, and I knew there was no point of me even attempting CPR or any other life-saving matters.
All I could think is he's gonna fire through this door. And I realized in that moment that I had left Kelsey in the back seat of the car. I ran back out the front door, and I was met by a very
kind lady. I know that she's wounded and she's also in shock. She's yelling about her babies being missing. She's also screaming, I knew he would do something like this. I knew it. And then she notices the man in the driveway.
She kindly grabbed me by my arm. That's when I realized I'd been shot in my arm. And she walked me over to his body. And I was able to say goodbye to my husband. And they were putting me in an ambulance shortly thereafter.
When police arrive, they find 5-year-old Gemma and 17-year-old Nick hiding in a closet. That's when Amanda's father drops by on his way home to say happy birthday to Kelsey.
As I got out of the car, there was 3 or 4 policemen that came up to me. And the first thing they said was, Amanda's in the hospital, but she's okay. She's been shot, but she's gonna be okay. And right at that point, that's when my heart just fell. And the first thing I thought of was the kids. Are the kids okay? What happened? And they said, yeah, the kids are here. They're with some of the neighbors that are here. And then I said, well, what about Wayne? That's when they continued to tell me he didn't make it.
We begin with that breaking news alert out of League City. A man police initially wanted for questioning is now wanted for murder.
We were the first news crew on the scene. We're getting there, and it's the chaos of the scene because you have a gunman on the run, you have dead body and someone seriously wounded, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened.
They put the hospital on lockdown because Cy was on the run.
I was at her bedside the whole time. I don't know, it's like a movie, a bad movie. It was a horrible nightmare.
So as this statewide manhunt is going on, police had reason to believe that Cy was going to try to run for the border. And it was a checkpoint in El Paso. They were able to identify that Cy was trying to cross. There wasn't much of a resistance. At that point, even Cy had figured out that this was over and he was going to be taken into custody. When they look inside the vehicle, they do find a gun. They find several clips with bullets inside where the casings match the 12 that were found on scene of the shooting back in Lake City.
I don't know how I made it through. I really don't. But I have children and they needed me and life didn't stop. I had to get out of bed every day. I had to accept that he was never coming back. Thank God for my children. I stayed in the house until the trial came, and it took us 2 years to go to trial.
As the family tries to heal, Amanda assumes the only time she will ever have to encounter Cy again is in court. But she is wrong.
Well, one day I get this phone call, and I can clearly see that it's the jail on my caller ID. So I turn on the voice recorder, and I took the phone call.
Hello?
Hello?
I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry for everything, Amanda. I'm really sorry.
Is this a joke?
No, I just want to apologize.
You almost killed me. Is this a joke?
No, Amanda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got scared.
Got scared?
I could not believe that I was listening to this person on the other end of the phone. How is this even allowed? Who is running this jail and allowing a murderer to call his victim?
I just want to pray with you guys. I'll put you on the phone real quick before we go to trial. Can I pray with you? Please, Jesus, please comfort Amanda. Please help me never harm her, never to cause her problems again.
Cy's staggering ability to keep harassing Amanda will even continue through the trial itself.
So I was charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and stalking.
In the middle of the case, Cy fires his defense attorney and decides he's going to defend himself now.
But I know that he wanted to get me on the stand and question me, and that was his way of doing it. He was able to question me for a very long period of time.
Cy thought that Amanda was going to wilt on the stand. That's not what happened.
Amanda comes through this a hero. The fact that she does not cave, that she looks him straight in the eye and answers his questions. So if he wanted control, he didn't get it. He got to talk to her, but he didn't get the responses, the feeling, the control that he was seeking. So in that case, Amanda comes out a winner.
I don't know how the law allows your attacker to question you. How is that even possible? But it happened.
After the trial wraps up, the jury is quick to return guilty verdicts. And on March 5th, 2020, Cy is sentenced to 50 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years.
I was disappointed because I feel like he should have gotten life without the possibility of parole. I truly believe that if he were to walk the streets again, if he were to ever get out, that he will kill me. He will finish the job.
I hope he never gets out, and all I can do is just say, let Jesus take the wheel. Even though I'm that close to her, I can't imagine going through what she went through. But we get through it every day. It's a process where we're all working through it.
I was angry with the police. I feel like they failed my family, and I think Cy Ghosh is pure evil. But there's still a big life to live, and I choose to just be happy. We have what, 40? I have 40 summers left. I'm gonna make the best of the 40 summers I have left. Wayne wouldn't want me to waste them.
The desert keeps secrets. Not just footprints swallowed by sand or tire tracks erased by wind, but the kind of secrets that settle deep into the bones of a town, the kind that sleep quietly for years until someone, disturbs the silence. In the summer of 1999, the air in northern Arizona hung heavy with heat. The kind of heat that makes asphalt shimmer and turns the horizon into a wavering mirage. Small towns across the state moved slowly in that heat. Gas stations hummed lazily. Screen doors slammed softly in the afternoons. People knew each other by name, by car, by the way they waved from their driveways. Nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen here. And then one night someone vanished. Her name was Emily Carter, 26 years old. Brown hair usually tied back in a loose ponytail. A quiet smile people remembered long after they'd left a conversation. She worked at a local diner just outside Flagstaff, the kind of roadside place where truckers stopped for coffee and locals came for pie after sunset. Emily had a routine. Everyone said that later. She finished the evening shift around 10:30 p.m. She wiped down the last table. She joked with the cook. She stepped outside into the warm desert night and crossed the gravel lot to her faded blue sedan. That was the last confirmed moment anyone ever saw her. The next morning, the diner owner noticed something strange. Emily never missed a shift. Not once. Her car was not in the employee lot. Her phone rang straight to voicemail. At first it felt like a simple explanation must exist. Maybe she'd gone out with friends. Maybe she'd driven to Phoenix for the weekend. But by Sunday afternoon the feeling in town began to change. Something wasn't right. Emily's sister, Laura Carter, drove past Emily's small rental house on the edge of town. The blinds were drawn. Her car wasn't there. The mailbox was empty. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. Her purse was on the kitchen table. Her shoes by the door. Her coffee mug still in the sink. But Emily herself was gone. No note. No message. No sign of a struggle. Just absence. Within hours, the Coconino County Sheriff's Office opened a missing persons report. At first, the investigation moved the way most missing person cases do in a quiet town. Calm questions, polite interviews, hopeful assumptions. Detectives knocked on doors. They spoke to coworkers. They retraced Emily's final hours. The timeline was simple. Too simple. She finished work, walked to her car, drove away. And then nothing. No ATM withdrawals. No credit card activity. No phone calls. Her car was found 2 days later, parked along a dirt turnout off a quiet desert road about 15 miles outside town. The vehicle sat under a pale desert sun, dust already collecting along the windshield. From a distance, it looked abandoned. Up close, it felt worse. The driver's door was unlocked. Emily's keys were gone. Her purse was still in the passenger seat. Detectives noticed something else immediately. The car had not been forced off the road. No skid marks. No damage. No sign of panic. Whoever parked the car had done it calmly, deliberately. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and stale heat. The radio was off. The seat adjusted the way Emily always drove. But the silence inside the vehicle felt wrong. It was the kind of silence investigators learned to recognize. The kind that whispers something bad happened here, just not where anyone can see it. Search teams spread across the surrounding desert. Helicopters circled slowly overhead. Volunteers walked long lines through dry brush and red sand. Dogs sniffed the ground around the turnout, circling, pulling, then losing the trail somewhere beyond the road. No body. No clothing. No weapon. No trace. The disappearance began to ripple through the community. In a small Arizona town, people notice when something breaks the routine. Rumors spread fast. Conversations lowered into whispers in grocery store aisles. Parents suddenly kept their children closer. What happened to Emily Carter? Detectives started with the obvious. Co-workers.
Friends. Family.
Her sister Laura insisted Emily had no enemies. No dangerous relationships. No hidden life. She liked quiet things, Laura told investigators. Work. Home. Movies. That's it. But detectives knew something else. People rarely disappear without a reason. Someone always knows more.
Someone always saw something.
And slowly, small fragments began to surface. A truck driver passing through town told police he had seen a blue sedan on that desert road late Friday night. He remembered because headlights were still on when he passed. Another witness thought they saw a second vehicle parked nearby, maybe a pickup truck. But memories blur quickly in the desert heat. Descriptions shifted.
Times changed.
Nothing solid formed. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The case began to slow. Detectives followed leads that collapsed one by one. A man spotted arguing with Emily at the diner, cleared. A drifter reported sleeping near the turnout. Nothing connected him to the disappearance. Emily Carter became something investigators dread hearing whispered in the halls of a police station. A cold case waiting to happen. But the family refused to let the story fade. Laura Carter called reporters. She printed flyers. She stood outside supermarkets asking strangers if they had seen anything that night. Year 1 passed. Then year 2. The desert wind erased whatever evidence might have once existed near that lonely road. Tire tracks vanished. Footprints disappeared. Witnesses moved away. New detectives rotated into the department. Boxes of files grew thicker. And eventually, Emily Carter's disappearance officially entered a quiet category stamped on the outside of a manila folder. Cold case. But something about the case never quite settled. There was one detail investigators couldn't shake.
The car.
Why leave it there? Why not drive it farther? Why not hide it better? The turnout wasn't remote enough to guarantee it would never be found. It felt staged. Almost like a message. Years later, one retired detective would say something chilling about that decision. Whoever left that car, he said, wasn't worried about us finding it. They were worried about us finding something else. But in 1999, no one understood what that meant. Time continued its slow march. Emily's face appeared less often on television. Flyers faded under desert sun. New crimes replaced old headlines. Children grew up. Neighbors moved away. And somewhere out there, hidden beneath years of silence, the truth about that night waited. Buried not just in the desert but inside a family. Because decades later, long after the town believed Emily Carter would never be found, a single discovery would shatter everything people thought they knew about her disappearance. A discovery that would expose a secret no one had imagined. A secret that had been hiding in plain sight for years. A secret that would transform a forgotten missing person file into something far darker. A murder. And when detectives finally opened the old evidence boxes again, they would realize the most disturbing truth of all. The person who knew what happened to Emily Carter had never left the story. They had been there from the beginning, standing close enough to watch the search, close enough to grieve with the family, close enough to help bury the truth. And for 20 years, no one suspected a thing. The desert had already erased the night Emily Carter disappeared. Wind moved across the red sand the way it always did, patient and indifferent, brushing away whatever fragile evidence might once have existed. Tire marks faded. Footprints softened and vanished. The world moved on, but the question refused to die. Where did Emily Carter go? By the fall of 1999, the investigation had shifted from urgency to persistence. Detectives who had once chased every rumor now worked slowly through interviews, rechecking statements, comparing timelines. Every small-town disappearance eventually reaches that moment, the moment when officers realize the answer is not going to appear quickly. Emily's case had reached that moment. Yet something about the details kept investigators uneasy. The car was still wrong. It sat in the impound lot for months after it was found, dust gathering along the faded blue paint. Crime scene technicians had combed through every inch of the vehicle. They dusted the dashboard, the door handles, the steering wheel. Most of the prints belonged to Emily. Others belonged to coworkers who had ridden with her before. Nothing unusual. No obvious stranger. But the absence of evidence only deepened the mystery. If someone had harmed Emily, where had it happened? The car showed no sign of struggle. No blood. No broken glass. It was as if she had simply stepped out of the driver's seat and vanished into the desert. Detectives retraced her final evening again. Friday night at the diner had been quiet. A few regulars. A handful of travelers. Emily moved through the shift the way she always did. Efficient, calm, polite. No arguments. No strange phone calls. At 10:18 p.m., a couple leaving the restaurant remembered seeing her through the front window, wiping down the counter. At 10:34 p.m., the cook heard the back door close as Emily walked out to the parking lot. After that, the trail dissolved into darkness. Investigators checked traffic cameras along the highway leading out of town. In 1999, those cameras were few and grainy, but they still offered something. At 10:47 p.m., a vehicle resembling Emily's blue sedan appeared on a highway camera heading east. The footage was blurry, the license plate unreadable, but the shape of the car matched. If it was Emily, she had driven out of town alone, and she had driven straight toward the desert. That raised the next question. Why? Emily had no known reason to be on that road. There were no homes nearby, no stores, no landmarks that would explain a late-night stop. The road led mostly to open land, miles of quiet desert stretching under the Arizona sky. Detectives began to consider the possibility that someone had asked her to meet there. Someone she trusted. Someone she didn't fear. That theory shifted the investigation in a new direction. The detectives started looking closer at the people in Emily's life. Friends, coworkers, family. One by one, they sat across from investigators in small interview rooms, answering questions about the woman everyone described as kind and careful. Most interviews followed the same pattern. Shock, confusion, grief. But one conversation left a strange impression. It happened during the first week of the investigation, when detectives spoke with Emily's brother-in-law, Daniel Harper. Daniel had been married to Emily's sister Laura for nearly 10 years. He worked construction, a tall man with sunburned skin, and the kind of quiet presence people often overlooked. When detectives asked about Emily, Daniel answered calmly. Too calmly, one officer later recalled. He described her as a good kid. Said they saw each other often at family dinners. Said he couldn't imagine anyone wanting to hurt her. His timeline was simple. On the night Emily disappeared, he had been home watching television. Laura confirmed it. The detectives noted the statement and moved on. At the time, nothing about Daniel Harper seemed suspicious. In fact, he had even joined the volunteer search teams during the first week. Neighbors remembered seeing him walking the desert with dozens of others, scanning the ground, calling Emily's name into the wind. Back then, it felt like a community pulling together. But hindsight would later cast those memories in a darker light. Because Daniel Harper wasn't the only person investigators questioned repeatedly. There was another name that kept resurfacing in the early weeks. A man named Kyle Jennings. Kyle had been a regular at the diner where Emily worked. Mid-30s. Lived alone in a trailer outside town. Some people described him as quiet. Others described him as strange. 2 witnesses told detectives they had seen Kyle speaking with Emily shortly before closing time on the night she vanished. The conversation seemed ordinary, but detectives still wanted to talk to him. When officers finally located Kyle Jennings 3 days after Emily disappeared, he seemed nervous from the moment they knocked on his door. Inside the trailer, the air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old carpet. Kyle insisted the conversation with Emily had been nothing important. Just coffee. Just small talk. He admitted he sometimes waited until the end of her shift to chat. She was nice to me, he said. That's all. But investigators noticed something odd. Kyle owned a pickup truck. A truck that matched the vague description given by the witness, who thought they saw a second vehicle near the desert turnout. Suddenly, the quiet diner regular moved to the top of the suspect list. Detectives obtained a warrant and searched his truck. They checked the bed of the vehicle, the tires, the floorboards. Nothing. No blood. No fibers. No sign Emily Carter had ever been inside. Still, the timing felt uncomfortable. The detectives pressed harder. Kyle denied following Emily, denied meeting her that night, denied ever being on the road where her car was found. But one detail worked in his favor. Several neighbors confirmed they saw Kyle at his trailer around 11 p.m. the same night Emily disappeared. The timeline didn't fit. Reluctantly, investigators were forced to step back. Another lead collapsed. By early 2000, the case had reached its first true dead end. Emily Carter had vanished. Her car had been abandoned in the desert. But there was no body. No confirmed crime scene. No suspect. The town of Flagstaff slowly returned to its routine. The headlines faded. The story moved from the front page to the back, then disappeared entirely. Only the Carter family refused to let the silence settle. Laura Carter kept searching. She called police every few months, asking if there were updates. She spoke to reporters whenever anniversaries approached. She lit candles at small vigils held in Emily's memory. People in town admired her determination. But they also saw something else. Exhaustion. Years passed. One detective retired. Then another. Eventually, the case file was placed in the department's cold case archive, a quiet room filled with boxes containing the unfinished stories of the past. The label on Emily's file read simply, "Missing person, Emily Carter, 1999. Inside were photographs of the blue sedan, maps of the desert search area, witness statements, and a handful of unanswered questions that had haunted investigators for years. The biggest one was painfully simple. If Emily Carter had been murdered, where was her body? Without that answer, the case felt frozen in time. But the truth was never truly gone. It had simply been waiting. Waiting inside the small details investigators overlooked. Waiting inside a family whose grief had never completely healed. Waiting inside a secret that had been carefully buried alongside the memory of a warm desert night in 1999. And nearly 20 years later, that secret would finally begin to crack. Not because of a confession, not because of a witness, but because of something no one expected. A single conversation. A quiet moment between 2 people who thought the past was already dead. A moment that would force detectives to reopen the Carter file and look again at the people who had stood closest to Emily from the very beginning. Because the truth, as investigators would soon discover, had never been lost in the desert. It had been living quietly inside the Carter family the entire time. And once that truth started to surface, the case would no longer look like a mysterious disappearance. It would look like something far darker, something planned, something personal, A murder hidden for decades behind the perfect silence of a small Arizona town. Time has a way of softening tragedies. New families move into old houses. Businesses close, reopen, change names. Children who once rode bicycles through quiet streets grow into adults who barely remember the fear that once lingered in their town. But some stories refuse to fade. Emily Carter's disappearance became one of those stories. For nearly 2 decades, the case sat quietly inside the archives of the Coconino County Sheriff's Office. A gray evidence box. Several thick binders of reports. Photographs slowly yellowing around the edges. Every few years, a detective would open the file again. Flip through the witness statements. Study the photos of the abandoned blue sedan. Trace the same old timeline across the page. Then close the folder with the same uneasy feeling. Something about the case never fit. The car had been left too carefully. Emily had no reason to be on that desert road. And despite dozens of interviews, no one had ever provided a convincing explanation for why she vanished. By 2016, the department had created a small cold case review team, a group of investigators tasked with re-examining unsolved files using modern techniques. Advances in forensic science had solved crimes that once seemed impossible. Old evidence suddenly had new value. DNA testing had grown more powerful. Digital databases connected pieces of information across states. Even a single overlooked detail could reopen a case. Detective Marcus Alvarez was assigned Emily Carter's file on a quiet Monday morning. He had worked homicide for more than 15 years, long enough to recognize the feeling that sometimes crawled into a case before the facts revealed themselves. That feeling returned the moment he opened the box. The file wasn't particularly large compared to other cold cases. But the timeline was clean. Too clean. Alvarez spread the documents across his desk and started reading from the beginning. June 1999. Missing person report. Witness interviews. Vehicle discovery. Search efforts. Lead after lead collapsing into nothing. The same frustration investigators had faced years earlier began creeping back as he worked through the pages. Then he reached something that made him pause. A photograph of Emily's car. It had been taken the day investigators found the vehicle along the desert turnout. The blue sedan sat at an angle beside the dusty road, sunlight reflecting across the windshield. Alvarez studied the image longer than expected. There was something subtle about the position of the car. The front tires pointed slightly toward the road, as if the driver had intended to leave, but changed their mind. He flipped to the next page. A diagram of the scene. The notes confirmed what the photograph suggested. The car had not been parked neatly. It had rolled to a stop, which raised an uncomfortable possibility. What if Emily hadn't parked the car herself? What if someone else had driven it there? Alvarez leaned back in his chair. If that were true, the timeline investigators had relied on for years might be wrong. He dug deeper. The original detectives had interviewed dozens of people connected to Emily's life. Most names appeared once or twice, but one name surfaced repeatedly across the pages. Daniel Harper, Emily's brother-in-law. Alvarez read every statement Daniel had given in 1999. At first glance, the answers seemed harmless. He had been home the night Emily disappeared, watching television. His wife Laura confirmed it, but something about the wording bothered Alvarez. The alibi relied entirely on Laura's confirmation. No one else had seen Daniel that night. And more importantly, Daniel had been deeply involved in the search. Alvarez flipped to a photograph taken during one of the early volunteer efforts. Dozens of townspeople walked shoulder to shoulder across the desert. Near the center of the image stood Daniel Harper. Baseball cap, work boots, eyes scanning the ground like everyone else. It was the kind of image meant to show community strength. But Alvarez had seen something similar before in other cases. Sometimes the person helping search already knew what they wouldn't find. He kept reading. Another detail surfaced in the early interview transcripts. One witness from the diner had remembered seeing Emily speaking with someone in the parking lot before she left work. At the time, investigators assumed it might have been Kyle Jennings, the diner regular they had questioned. But the witness had never been completely certain. The description had been vague. Tall male, dark shirt, Pickup truck nearby. Alvarez leaned forward again. Daniel Harper owned a pickup truck. The file included a brief mention of it. Back then, detectives had dismissed the possibility quickly. Daniel's alibi seemed solid, and no physical evidence connected him to the disappearance. But the more Alvarez stared at the documents, the more a quiet thought began to form. What if the investigators had trusted the wrong person? He needed to know more about Daniel Harper. Alvarez searched through department databases. Daniel still lived in the same region. Still married to Laura Carter. Still working construction. No criminal record. No history of violence. On paper, he appeared exactly the same as he had in 1999. Ordinary. Invisible. Safe. But long experience had taught Alvarez something important. The most dangerous suspects often looked ordinary. He requested the original evidence box from storage. Several days later, a technician placed the container on his desk. Inside were items investigators had collected but never fully tested with modern forensic tools. Clothing from Emily's car. Hair samples. Swabs from the steering wheel. Alvarez sent everything to the lab for new analysis. The process would take weeks. In the meantime, he started revisiting old witnesses. Some had moved away. Some had died. But a few still lived in the same quiet neighborhoods they had occupied 20 years earlier. One of those people was the truck driver who had originally reported seeing Emily's car along the desert road. The man was older now. Gray hair. Slower movements. But his memory remained sharp. He described the night again in careful detail. Late drive. Headlights shining from the parked sedan. The outline of another vehicle nearby. What kind of vehicle? Alvarez asked. The man squinted, thinking. I always figured it was a pickup, he said. Hard to tell in the dark. Did you see anyone standing outside? The man shook his head slowly. No, but I remember something strange. Alvarez waited. The headlights on that car, the man continued. They were still on when I passed. That's why I noticed it. Alvarez felt a quiet chill run down his spine. If Emily had parked the car herself, she would have turned the lights off. But if someone else abandoned the vehicle quickly, they might forget. Suddenly, the desert turnout looked less like a meeting place and more like a dumping site. Back at the station, Alvarez studied Daniel Harper's timeline again. The man claimed he had been home around the time Emily disappeared. But construction workers often finished jobs late. Schedules changed. Routes crossed highways and rural roads. Alvarez began mapping Daniel's possible movements on the night of June 18, 1999. The more he examined the geography, the more uncomfortable the coincidence became. The desert road where Emily's car had been abandoned lay directly between the diner and the highway leading toward Daniel's neighborhood. A route someone might easily pass without attracting attention. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. Alvarez needed something concrete. Weeks passed. Then the lab results finally arrived. Most of the evidence produced nothing new. But one test delivered an unexpected development. Technicians had recovered touch DNA from the inside handle of the passenger door. The sample was partial, degraded by time, but there was enough genetic material to compare against known profiles. And when the lab entered the data into the national database, it returned no match, which meant the DNA belonged to someone who had never been arrested. Someone outside the system. Alvarez stared at the report for a long moment. If the passenger door had been opened the night Emily disappeared, whoever touched that handle might have been with her in the car. And if the DNA didn't belong to a known suspect, then the person investigators were looking for might have been hiding in plain sight all along. Someone close enough to Emily that no one ever questioned their presence. Someone whose name had appeared in the file again and again without raising alarms. Alvarez slowly closed the lab report. Because the deeper he looked into Emily Carter's life, the more one possibility refused to disappear. The person who took her into the desert that night might not have been a stranger. It might have been someone she trusted. Someone who had shared meals with her. Someone who had stood beside the Carter family during vigils and searches. Someone who had spent 20 years watching the investigation fade, believing the truth would stay buried forever. But secrets rarely survive forever. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, the Emily Carter cold case was beginning to move again. Quietly, slowly, but in a direction that pointed straight back toward the Carter family itself. Cold cases rarely wake up all at once. They stir slowly, like something buried under layers of dust and years of silence. A small detail shifts. A forgotten name appears again. A single piece of evidence refuses to stay quiet. For Detective Marcus Alvarez, that moment came late one evening while the station had nearly emptied. The Emily Carter file lay open across his desk. The lab report sat beside it. Touch DNA recovered from the passenger side door handle of Emily's abandoned sedan. Unknown, unidentified, but undeniably present. Alvarez studied the scene photos again. The blue car sat exactly as investigators had found it in 1999, tilted slightly toward the road, headlights still burning when the truck driver passed hours earlier. If someone had opened that passenger door, they had likely been inside the vehicle with Emily, which meant the simplest explanation was also the most unsettling. Emily hadn't been alone when she drove out into the desert. The question was who, and why no one had connected that person to the case before. Alvarez began assembling a new list of individuals connected closely to Emily's life. He compared names against the evidence logs, the witness statements, the original interview notes from 1999. Patterns began to appear. One name appeared everywhere. Daniel Harper, Emily's brother-in-law. His involvement in the early days of the investigation had always looked like grief-driven participation, helping with searches, standing beside the Carter family, answering questions calmly. But when Alvarez read the transcripts again, carefully this time, small details began to stand out. During his first interview, Daniel had mentioned something curious. He said he had heard about Emily's disappearance late Saturday morning when Laura received a phone call from their mother. But the missing person report hadn't been filed until early Sunday afternoon, which meant Daniel somehow knew Emily was missing nearly a full day before the police officially treated the situation as serious. Alvarez circled the line in the transcript. Maybe it was a simple memory mistake. Maybe it meant nothing. But in cold cases, sometimes the smallest inconsistencies open the biggest doors. The next step was simple. Alvarez needed a DNA sample from Daniel Harper, but asking directly could alert him. Cold case investigators learned long ago that suspects who had lived comfortably for decades could panic when old crimes resurfaced. Instead, Alvarez chose a quieter approach: surveillance. 2 plainclothes officers began observing Daniel's daily routine. The man's life appeared almost painfully ordinary. He left his house early in the morning for construction work, returned home by late afternoon, occasionally stopped at a gas station on the way. In the evenings, he often sat on the porch with Laura. From the outside, the Harpers looked like a normal couple who had built a quiet life together. But Alvarez knew appearances could lie. One afternoon, an officer watched Daniel throw away a fast food cup in a trash can outside a hardware store. Minutes later, the officer retrieved it. The plastic lid still held traces of saliva. It was enough. The cup went straight to the lab. The waiting felt longer than it should have. Several days passed before the phone call finally came. The technician's voice was calm, professional, but the words landed like a sudden crack of thunder. The DNA recovered from Emily Carter's passenger door matched Daniel Harper. For a long moment, Alvarez didn't speak. After 19 years of silence, the case had just shifted. Violently. Daniel Harper had been inside Emily's car the night she disappeared, which meant the man who had searched the desert with volunteers. The man who had comforted the Carter family. The man who had stood beside Laura during vigils for her missing sister. Had been present during the final hours of Emily's life. But DNA alone didn't explain everything. Investigators still had no body, no murder weapon, no direct evidence showing what had happened after Emily left the diner that night. The case had moved forward, but it still needed proof. Alvarez reopened the witness interviews from 1999 once more. This time he focused on something investigators had overlooked before: Emily's behavior in the days before she vanished. Several coworkers had mentioned she seemed distracted during the week leading up to her disappearance. Not frightened, but uneasy. One waitress remembered Emily stepping outside during a shift to take a phone call. When she came back inside, she looked pale. When asked about it, Emily brushed it off. "Just family stuff," she said. At the time, no one thought twice about it. Now that phrase sounded very different. Family stuff. Alvarez arranged a new interview with Laura Carter. Nearly 2 decades had passed since the original investigation, and the woman who walked into the station looked older, worn down by years of unanswered questions. But the pain in her eyes was still there. Still raw. Alvarez spoke gently, explaining that the department was reviewing the case with new forensic technology. Laura listened quietly. Then he asked about Emily's final week. "Did she seem worried about anything?" he asked. Laura hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like she might say no. Then something shifted. A memory. A doubt. "There was one thing," she said slowly. "What was it?" Laura looked down at her hands. "Emily asked me a strange question a few days before she disappeared." Alvarez leaned forward. "What kind of question?" Laura took a breath. She asked if Daniel had been acting differently. The room fell silent. Alvarez felt the weight of the moment settle between them. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "I said no," Laura whispered. "I didn't think anything of it." "Did she explain why she asked?" Laura shook her head. "No." She just said maybe she was imagining things. The detective's mind raced. If Emily had noticed something about Daniel, something that made her uneasy, that meant the tension between them might have existed before the night she vanished. Which opened a chilling possibility. What if Emily had discovered something about her brother-in-law? Something he didn't want exposed? As the interview ended, Laura stood slowly. There was one more question Alvarez had been saving. He hesitated before asking it. "Laura, did Emily ever mention meeting Daniel alone?" Laura frowned. "No." "Why would she?" Alvarez didn't answer. Because the truth was already starting to take shape inside his mind. Emily Carter hadn't driven into the desert to meet a stranger. She had driven there with someone she trusted. Someone close enough to her family that she wouldn't have been afraid. And the evidence now showed that person had been sitting inside her car. Daniel Harper. The same man who had lived quietly in the same town for nearly 20 years, never once suspected of involvement in the disappearance. But something else about the timeline still bothered Alvarez. If Daniel had been in Emily's car, why abandon it so close to the road? Why leave the headlights on? Why risk someone seeing the vehicle? Those weren't the actions of someone calm and careful. Those were the actions of someone in a hurry. Someone who had just done something terrible. Something they hadn't fully planned. And if that was true, then somewhere out in the vast Arizona desert there had to be another place. A place where the real crime happened. A place where Emily Carter's story ended. The desert was enormous. Miles of empty land stretched in every direction beyond the turnout where the car had been found. Finding one hidden grave in all that silence would seem impossible. But Alvarez knew something about killers who believed their secrets were safe. Over time, they grow comfortable, careless, and sometimes they talk. Because the biggest mistake people make when hiding a crime is believing the past stays buried forever. The truth is far more dangerous. The past waits, patiently, for the moment when someone finally starts asking the right questions. When a cold case finally begins to move, the silence that once protected it starts to crack. Detective Marcus Alvarez had spent years working homicide. He knew how fragile momentum could be in an investigation that old. Evidence disappears. Memories fade. Witnesses grow uncertain. But sometimes, when one hidden truth finally surfaces, it drags others with it. Daniel Harper's DNA inside Emily Carter's car was no longer speculation. It was fact. The lab confirmed the match twice. 2 separate technicians ran the comparison. Both reached the same conclusion. The genetic profile recovered from the passenger door handle belonged to Daniel Harper, which meant that sometime during the night Emily vanished, Daniel had been inside her vehicle. But proving he had been there was only the beginning. Alvarez still needed to answer the question that mattered most. What happened after Emily drove into the desert? The detective gathered his team in a quiet conference room the following morning. Maps of northern Arizona covered the table. Satellite photos of the desert road, where the car had been found, sat beside copies of the old evidence reports. Every investigator in the room knew the weight of the case. 19 years of silence. 19 years of a family waiting for answers. Alvarez pointed to the turnout where the sedan had been abandoned. If Daniel was inside the car, he said, then Emily likely drove him there, or he followed her. One of the younger detectives studied the map. But why meet there? She asked. That's the question. The desert road had almost nothing along it. No houses. No gas stations. No businesses. Just miles of open land. A perfect place for a conversation no one else would hear. Or something worse. The team began reconstructing the possible timeline. Emily left the diner shortly after 10:30 p.m. She drove east out of town. Somewhere along the way, Daniel either joined her in the car or followed her in his truck. They reached the desert turnout sometime around 11 p.m. That's when the truck driver saw the headlights. After that moment, the timeline dissolved into darkness. The next step in the investigation required something investigators often dreaded in old cases: confronting the family again. Alvarez knew he couldn't move forward without speaking to Laura Carter. But this time the conversation would be very different. When Laura arrived at the station, the detectives didn't hide the truth. Alvarez placed a single photograph on the table. It showed the inside of Emily's car. Then he spoke quietly. We found new DNA evidence. Laura looked confused at first. What kind of evidence? Alvarez slid the lab report across the table. The sample was recovered from the passenger door handle. Laura's eyes moved slowly across the page. Then she reached the line that changed everything. Her face went pale. No, she whispered. The word escaped her before she could stop it. Alvarez watched carefully. The moment someone realizes the truth about a loved one is often the most devastating part of an investigation. The world doesn't break loudly. It fractures quietly. Laura looked up at him. That can't be right. The lab confirmed it twice, Alvarez said. Her hands trembled. You're saying Daniel was in Emily's car? Yes. Silence filled the room. Laura shook her head slowly, as if trying to push the idea away. No, Daniel helped search for her. I know. He cried with us. Alvarez didn't respond. Because the terrible truth about violent crimes is that grief can be performed just as easily as innocence. Laura covered her mouth with both hands. For nearly 20 years, she had lived beside the man now sitting at the center of the investigation. Shared dinners. Shared holidays. Shared memories. And now those memories began twisting into something else. Something darker. Did Emily ever argue with Daniel? Alvarez asked gently. Laura stared at the floor. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then the silence broke. There was something, she said quietly. The detectives leaned forward. It happened maybe a week before she disappeared. What happened? Laura swallowed hard. Emily came over for dinner. Daniel and I were in the kitchen when she arrived. I remember they looked uncomfortable around each other. Did they say why? No. Laura rubbed her forehead, struggling to recall the details. Later that night, Emily pulled me aside. What did she say? Laura's voice dropped to a whisper. She asked me if Daniel had ever said anything strange about her. Alvarez felt the air in the room tighten. What kind of strange? Laura hesitated. Then she spoke the words that had haunted her ever since. She said Daniel had been acting too friendly. The detectives exchanged a glance. What do you mean by friendly? Alvarez asked. Laura looked ashamed, even saying it out loud. She thought maybe he had a crush on her. The room fell silent again. A crush. It sounded almost harmless on the surface. But investigators knew how quickly obsession could turn dangerous. Did Emily seem scared? Alvarez asked. Laura shook her head slowly. No more uncomfortable than scared. Did Daniel ever act inappropriately toward her in front of you? No. But Laura's voice carried doubt now. The kind of doubt that grows when someone begins re-examining years of memories. After that dinner, she continued, Emily told me she planned to talk to Daniel privately. Alvarez felt the pieces begin to shift. Did she say when? Laura nodded faintly. She said maybe after work one night, just to clear the air. A cold realization spread across the room. Emily had planned to confront Daniel, and days later she vanished. If that confrontation happened inside the car that night in the desert, the situation could have escalated quickly. Arguments in isolated places often did, especially when one person had something to lose. Alvarez closed his notebook slowly, because now the investigation had a possible motive: obsession, rejection, and fear of exposure. But there was still one critical question left unanswered. Where was Emily Carter? Without a body, proving murder in court would be difficult. And Daniel Harper had lived freely for nearly 2 decades without making a single confession. But cold cases sometimes crack in unexpected ways. Not through evidence, not through witnesses, through time. Because time changes people. Secrets grow heavy. And sometimes the people who carry them begin to talk, carelessly, quietly, believing no one is listening. That was exactly what had happened just months earlier. A conversation. A private moment between 2 people who trusted each other. A moment that would soon pull investigators toward a terrifying possibility. That somewhere out in the Arizona desert, Emily Carter had been buried. And someone close to Daniel Harper might already know exactly where. For 19 years, the desert had remained silent. Wind moved across the red earth, sand shifting across dry brush and stone, erasing whatever faint marks might once have existed. Somewhere out there, investigators believed, Emily Carter's story had ended. The only problem was finding where. Detective Marcus Alvarez knew that solving a case this old rarely happened through a single dramatic discovery. Instead, the truth surfaced in fragments. A memory, a contradiction, a careless remark spoken years after people believed the danger had passed. And that fragment had finally appeared. It came from someone no one had expected. A woman named Rachel Harper. Rachel was Daniel Harper's daughter from a previous relationship. In 1999, she had been only 15 years old, living part-time with her father and Laura Carter. Back then, she had been interviewed briefly by investigators. A teenager. Quiet. Shy. She told detectives she remembered nothing unusual the night Emily disappeared. Her statement had been placed into the file and forgotten. But nearly 2 decades later, Rachel walked into the sheriff's office on her own. Not because detectives asked her to, because something had been bothering her for years. When Alvarez first met her, Rachel looked nervous. Not frightened exactly, but uneasy in the way someone appears when they're about to open a door they have avoided for a long time. The interview room was quiet. A recorder clicked softly as Alvarez asked the first question. "What made you decide to come in now?" Rachel stared at the table. "For a long time I thought maybe I imagined it," she said. "Imagined what?" She hesitated. "Something my dad said." Alvarez leaned forward slightly. "What did he say?" Rachel swallowed. "It was years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years after Emily disappeared." The room grew still. "My dad and I were driving outside town," she continued. "Just talking. I remember we passed the road where her car had been found." Alvarez recognized the moment instantly. The desert turnout. "What happened then?" he asked. Rachel rubbed her hands together nervously. "He said something strange." "What exactly did he say?" For a moment Rachel didn't answer. Then she spoke quietly. "He said they'll never find her out there." The words hung in the air. Detective Alvarez felt the weight of them settle into the room like a sudden drop in temperature. "Did he explain what he meant?" he asked. Rachel shook her head. "I asked him what he was talking about, and he just laughed." A hollow laugh, she explained. The kind people use when they want a conversation to end quickly. "He said I misunderstood. But you didn't forget it." "No," she whispered. For years, Rachel said nothing. She assumed the comment was meaningless. Maybe a joke. Maybe frustration over the case never being solved. But when she recently saw a television program about cold cases reopening with new forensic technology, the memory came back. Stronger. Sharper. Suddenly, the words sounded different. "They'll never find her out there." Rachel looked up at Alvarez. "Do you think my dad had something to do with Emily disappearing? The detective didn't answer immediately, because now the investigation had something it had never possessed before. A witness statement pointing directly toward Daniel Harper's knowledge of what happened in the desert. And combined with the DNA evidence, the case was shifting rapidly from suspicion to something far more serious. Alvarez thanked Rachel and ended the interview. The moment she left the room, the detective called the rest of his team together. The conversation she described might not be a confession, but it was close enough to change everything. Daniel Harper had implied he knew where Emily Carter was, which meant investigators had a new direction. The desert. Not just the turnout where the car had been abandoned, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere far enough away that Daniel believed the body would never be discovered. The next step required technology that investigators in 1999 simply didn't have. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, modern search mapping. Within days, Alvarez assembled a search team and returned to the same stretch of desert where Emily's car had once been found. The road looked almost identical to the old photographs. Dusty, quiet, endless skies stretching across the Arizona horizon. But the area beyond the turnout was vast. Miles of rugged terrain filled with rock formations, dry washes, and scattered vegetation. If someone had buried a body here 20 years earlier, nature would have done an excellent job hiding it. Search teams began slowly, carefully. They studied satellite imagery looking for subtle disturbances in the terrain, patches where soil color shifted slightly or vegetation grew differently. Often those signs pointed to natural changes, but sometimes they revealed something else. Something buried. After several days of scanning the surrounding land, one technician called Alvarez over to the radar screen. There, the technician said quietly. On the display, a faint anomaly appeared beneath the surface of the desert floor. A rectangular disturbance, roughly 6 feet long, located nearly half a mile beyond the turnout where Emily's car had been discovered. The location was remote enough that someone could dig without fear of being seen from the road. Alvarez stared at the image. For 20 years, the desert had hidden its secret. Now that secret was beginning to rise. The team drove to the coordinates the following morning. The landscape looked undisturbed at first glance. Dry soil, small clusters of sagebrush. Nothing remarkable. But the radar equipment confirmed what the satellite imagery had suggested. Something had once been buried there. Investigators marked the ground with small flags. Then they began to dig. The first few inches revealed nothing but compacted dirt. Then the shovel struck something different. A faint patch of darker soil. Evidence that the ground had once been disturbed. Everyone on the team grew quiet. Another layer of dirt came away. Then another. Minutes stretched into an hour. The hole deepened. And then one of the investigators froze. "Stop," he said. Alvarez stepped forward. At the bottom of the shallow excavation, something pale had begun to emerge from the earth. Not stone. Not bone fragments scattered randomly. A shape. The unmistakable curve of a human skull. For a moment, no one moved. 20 years earlier, Emily Carter had vanished into the Arizona night. Now, slowly, carefully, the desert was giving her back. But as investigators continued uncovering the remains, another chilling realization began forming. The skeleton had not been buried alone. Just beneath the ribcage, partially hidden by the soil, lay another object. Something metallic. Something investigators did not expect to find. A rusted piece of metal that might explain exactly how Emily Carter had died. And if that object belonged to Daniel Harper, the case that had slept for nearly 2 decades was about to explode into something far more dangerous. Because once the desert reveals one secret, it rarely stops at just one. The desert had finally broken its silence. For nearly 2 decades, the Arizona sun had burned over that stretch of land without revealing what lay beneath the soil. Wind had swept across the ground thousands of times, carrying dust and sand across a grave no one knew existed. Now the earth had opened. Detective Marcus Alvarez stood beside the excavation site as the forensic team worked carefully in the early morning light. The hole was no longer shallow. Layers of soil had been removed piece by piece, each movement slow, deliberate, respectful. What lay beneath them was no longer a possibility. It was a person. The skeleton had been buried roughly 3 feet below the surface, wrapped partially in what remained of fabric that had long since decomposed. The bones were fragile but mostly intact, arranged exactly the way a human body settles when placed deliberately into the ground. There was no doubt in anyone's mind. This was a burial, not an accident, not someone lost in the desert. Someone had dug a grave here, and someone had intended it to remain hidden forever. The medical examiner knelt carefully near the remains, brushing away loose soil with a soft tool. The skull had turned slightly to one side during decomposition, empty eye sockets staring toward the horizon where the desert stretched endlessly. Nearby lay the object the investigators had noticed moments earlier. A rusted metal tool. At first glance, it looked like little more than a corroded piece of scrap, but once the dirt was cleared away, its shape became clear. A hammer. The wooden handle had partially rotted away, leaving only dark fragments clinging to the metal head. Alvarez stared at it quietly. Construction workers used hammers every day, and Daniel Harper had spent most of his life working construction. But the object raised another, more disturbing question. Had it been used as a weapon? The medical examiner leaned closer to the skull, studying the surface carefully. There it was. A fracture. Not from natural decay. Not from the pressure of soil. A clean break across the side of the skull consistent with blunt force trauma. The silence around the excavation grew heavier. Emily Carter had not simply disappeared. She had been killed. And buried. Right here in the desert less than a mile from where her car had been abandoned. The forensic team continued working through the site for hours, documenting every detail before removing the remains. Each bone was photographed, each fragment carefully collected. Among the soil near the skeleton, they found several additional items. Buttons from a shirt, a thin chain necklace, and something else. A ring. It was simple, silver with a small turquoise stone. When Alvarez saw it, he immediately thought of the Carter family. The jewelry would need confirmation, but the odds were overwhelming. The body in that grave was almost certainly Emily Carter. 20 years after she vanished, her story had finally surfaced from the desert. But recovering the remains was only part of the investigation. Now detectives needed to prove who had placed her there. Back at the forensic lab, the medical examiner began the slow process of analyzing the skeleton. Dental records would confirm the identity. The skull fracture would reveal the likely cause of death. But investigators already suspected the truth. Emily Carter had died from a violent blow to the head, and the hammer buried beside her might have been the weapon. Meanwhile, Detective Alvarez turned his attention to the man whose shadow had grown larger with every discovery. Daniel Harper. For nearly 2 decades, Daniel had lived a quiet life, believing the desert had protected him, believing the grave he dug would never be found. But now the case had changed. Radically. Alvarez knew the moment they approached Daniel again would be critical. After so many years, suspects often believed they were safe. When that illusion breaks, reactions can become unpredictable. Confession, denial, panic. Every possibility was on the table. Before making contact, Alvarez and his team gathered one final piece of information. They reviewed Daniel Harper's work history from 1999. Construction companies, job sites, schedules. One detail stood out immediately. During the summer Emily disappeared, Daniel had been working on a road maintenance project less than 10 miles from the desert turnout. The crew often carried tools with them, including hammers. The connection tightened the circle. DNA inside Emily's car. A witness recalling Daniel's strange comment about the desert. A possible murder weapon consistent with his occupation. And now a buried body. But the most painful moment still remained. The Carter family needed to know. Laura Carter arrived at the station later that afternoon. Her face showed the exhaustion of years spent searching for answers that never came. Alvarez met her privately. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When he finally told her what investigators had found in the desert, Laura didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She simply closed her eyes. For a long moment she said nothing, because the worst part of grief is not always the shock. Sometimes it's the confirmation. Was it her? She whispered. We believe so, Alvarez said gently. We're confirming through dental records. Laura nodded slowly. Her sister had not vanished. She had been lying in the desert for 20 years. But there was another truth waiting behind that discovery. A truth Laura had begun to sense since the moment the detective showed her the DNA report. Daniel, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Alvarez hesitated only briefly. He's now the primary suspect. Laura stared at the floor. For 19 years, she had shared a home with the man investigators now believed murdered her sister. Shared a bed. Shared a life. The weight of that realization settled heavily across the room. I want to be there, Laura said suddenly. Alvarez looked at her carefully. For what? When you confront him. The detective shook his head gently. That won't be possible. Laura's voice cracked. I deserve to hear the truth. Alvarez didn't respond. Because deep down, he knew something Laura Carter did not. The confrontation with Daniel Harper would not be simple. Men who hide crimes for decades rarely surrender easily. Sometimes they deny everything. Sometimes they run. And sometimes, when they realize the truth is finally closing and they do something far more dangerous. That was why detectives had already begun preparing the next step. An arrest warrant. Because the moment Daniel Harper realized the desert had given up its secret, his quiet life would collapse. And the man who had once stood beside search teams calling Emily's name would finally have to answer the question he had avoided for 20 years. What really happened in the Arizona desert on the night Emily Carter died? The news moved quietly through the sheriff's department before it reached the public. A body had been found in the desert. For the investigators working the case, there was little doubt left about the identity. Dental records confirmed it within hours. The remains buried beneath 3 feet of Arizona soil belonged to Emily Carter. After 19 years, the missing person file was no longer a mystery. It was a homicide. The medical examiner's report arrived the following morning. The fracture in Emily's skull told the story clearly. One devastating blow to the left side of her head. Blunt force trauma. Consistent with a hammer. There were no defensive wounds visible on the skeleton, which suggested the attack had come suddenly, perhaps during an argument, perhaps without warning. Emily Carter had not run. She had not fought. She had likely never seen the blow coming. Detective Marcus Alvarez read the report slowly, then closed the folder. The evidence had finally reached the point investigators needed. Body. Cause of death. Weapon buried with the victim. DNA linking Daniel Harper to the victim's car. The case that once felt like smoke was now solid. And it pointed in one direction. Daniel Harper. The arrest warrant was signed late that afternoon. But before detectives moved in, Alvarez made one more decision. He wanted to speak with Daniel face-to-face. Not in handcuffs. Not during a raid. He wanted to see how the man reacted when confronted with the truth. 2 detectives drove to Daniel's house just after sunset. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights flickered on as dusk settled across the small town. The house looked exactly as it had during surveillance. Modest, clean, nothing about it suggesting the dark history investigators now believed was hidden inside. Daniel answered the door himself. For a moment his expression showed simple confusion. Can I help you? Alvarez stepped forward. Daniel Harper? That's me. We'd like to talk with you about Emily Carter. For a fraction of a second something flickered across Daniel's face. Not panic. Not fear. Recognition. Then the mask returned. I already told the police everything years ago. Alvarez nodded. We're reviewing the case again. Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside. Come in. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and dust. A television played quietly in the background. Photographs lined the walls, family gatherings, holidays, smiling faces frozen in moments that now looked strangely hollow. Laura Carter was not home. Daniel sat across from the detectives in an armchair. His posture was relaxed. Almost too relaxed. What do you need from me? He asked. Alvarez placed a folder on the table. We've recovered new evidence. Daniel shrugged slightly. That happens with old cases sometimes. Then Alvarez spoke the words that changed everything. We found Emily. The silence that followed stretched across the room, like a sudden drop in temperature. Daniel's expression didn't change immediately. He simply stared. Where? He asked. In the desert. Another pause. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair. That's terrible. But Alvarez noticed something important. No shock. No questions. Just a quiet acknowledgement. We also recovered the murder weapon, Alvarez continued. Now Daniel's eyes moved slightly. Not toward the detectives. Toward the folder. A hammer, Alvarez said. For the first time, Daniel's composure cracked. Just slightly. His jaw tightened. That doesn't mean anything, he said. Alvarez slid a photograph across the table. The image showed the excavation site. Emily's skeletal remains partially uncovered by investigators. Daniel looked down at it, then quickly away. We also found DNA in Emily's car, Alvarez added calmly. Now the room felt smaller.
Tighter.
Daniel said nothing. The DNA belongs to you. The words landed with a quiet finality. For several seconds, Daniel simply stared at the carpet. Then he exhaled slowly. I rode in her car once or twice, he said. That's not unusual. But the DNA was on the passenger door handle, Alvarez replied. Daniel looked up. So? Which means you were likely inside the car the night she disappeared. The man's calm demeanor began to erode. You can't prove that. Your daughter remembers something you said, Alvarez continued. Now Daniel froze completely. What did Rachel tell you? Alvarez watched him carefully. That they would never find her in the desert. The silence that followed was heavy enough to feel. Daniel's face changed slowly. The confidence drained away. Not replaced by panic, but by something colder. Resignation. You dug her up, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Alvarez didn't respond. Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Just a short, bitter sound. 20 years, he muttered. The detectives waited. Because suspects who reach this moment often begin talking without realizing it. Daniel leaned forward. You know what the funny part is? He said. No one ever suspected me. His voice carried a strange calm now. I helped search for her, he continued. I stood right beside everyone. I watched them comb that desert. Alvarez said nothing. Daniel's eyes drifted toward the window. People think killers look different, he said quietly. But we don't. The room grew silent again. Then Alvarez spoke. Daniel Harper, you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter. The words ended 20 years of freedom. Daniel didn't resist. He simply stood. As the handcuffs closed around his wrists, he spoke one final sentence. She shouldn't have threatened me. The detectives froze. What do you mean? Alvarez asked. Daniel smiled faintly. You'll figure it out. Then he said nothing more. But that one sentence opened a new question investigators had never fully understood. Why had Emily Carter confronted her brother-in-law in the first place? What had she threatened to reveal? Because whatever secret Emily discovered back in 1999, it had been dangerous enough to get her killed. And Daniel Harper had just confirmed something chilling. The murder hadn't been an accident. It had been a decision. A decision made during one moment in the desert that changed everything forever. The moment the handcuffs clicked around Daniel Harper's wrists, the quiet life he had built for nearly 20 years collapsed. The patrol car carried him away from the same house where he had eaten dinner, watched television, and slept beside Laura Carter for decades. The same house where Emily's memory had hung silently in family photographs and anniversary candles. But now the illusion was gone. Inside the interrogation room at the sheriff's office, the atmosphere felt different from earlier interviews. The walls were the same dull gray. The table was the same metal surface that had held thousands of quiet conversations between suspects and detectives. But this time, the man sitting across from Detective Marcus Alvarez was no longer a helpful witness. He was a murder suspect. Daniel Harper sat with his hands folded calmly in front of him. The handcuffs had been removed, but two officers stood outside the room. He looked tired, not frightened. Not angry, just tired. 20 years of carrying a secret can do that to a person. Alvarez placed a recorder on the table. You understand why you're here, he said. Daniel nodded slowly. You found her. Yes. Silence followed. In many interrogations, detectives push suspects aggressively, confronting them with evidence and accusations. But Alvarez knew this case required something different. Daniel had already lived with the truth for 2 decades. The right approach was patience. Tell me about that night, Alvarez said quietly. Daniel stared at the table for a long moment. Then he sighed. You already know most of it. We know you were in her car. Another pause. Yes. The word came easily. No hesitation. Daniel looked up at the detective. She called me. The statement shifted the story instantly. She called you? Alvarez asked. Yes. When? The night she disappeared. Around 9 o'clock. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the ceiling as if replaying a memory he had tried to bury for years. She said she wanted to talk. Said it was important. What about? Daniel laughed softly. You really don't know? Alvarez didn't answer. Daniel continued. Emily thought she'd figured something out. What? She thought I was having an affair. The detective watched his face carefully. With who? Alvarez asked. Daniel smiled bitterly. That's the funny part. I wasn't. The room went quiet again. But she believed it, Daniel continued. She thought I was cheating on Laura. What made her think that? Daniel shrugged. I guess she saw me somewhere she shouldn't have. Where? At a bar in Flagstaff. The story began to unfold slowly, like a door opening after years of rust. According to Daniel, Emily had spotted him leaving the bar with another woman several weeks before she disappeared. Emily assumed the worst. She believed Daniel was betraying her sister. She told me she was going to tell Laura, Daniel said. Alvarez leaned forward. And that's why you met her? Yes. Where? The diner parking lot. That moment connected directly with the witness statement from 1999. Someone had Emily speaking with a tall man near a pickup truck before leaving work. Then what happened? Alvarez asked. Daniel rubbed his face. We drove. In her car? Yes. Why? She said she didn't want anyone seeing us argue. So Emily had chosen the desert road. A quiet place for private conversation. A place where no one else would hear raised voices. What did you talk about out there? Alvarez asked. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. She kept accusing me of lying. Were you? No. So, who is the woman at the bar? Daniel looked down again. My sister. The words hung in the room. Alvarez waited. She was visiting from Phoenix, Daniel continued. We grabbed a drink together. That's it. But Emily didn't believe you. Daniel shook his head. No matter what I said, she thought I was making excuses. The argument grew worse. That much was clear. Voices rising in the darkness of the desert road. Emily standing outside the car. Daniel trying to calm her down. She said she was going to tell Laura everything, Daniel said quietly. And that scared you. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he nodded. I knew how it would look, even if it wasn't true. Years of marriage. Trust shattered. A family broken apart. All because of a misunderstanding. At first, I just wanted to stop her from leaving, Daniel said. What do you mean? She started walking back to the car. The hammer had been in Daniel's truck, a tool he carried every day for work. He claimed he grabbed it without thinking. I didn't plan anything, he said. Alvarez watched him carefully. Then what happened? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. She turned around. The memory seemed to hang in the room like a shadow. She was yelling, he continued, telling me I was a liar. And then, Daniel's voice dropped. I swung. Just once. The blow struck the side of Emily's head. She collapsed instantly. No scream. No struggle. Just silence. For several seconds, Daniel stood there in the desert darkness, staring at what he had done. I thought she was unconscious, he said. But she wasn't. The medical examiner had already confirmed that. The fracture in the skull was fatal. The life drained out of Emily Carter within minutes. "What did you do next?" Alvarez asked. Daniel swallowed. "I panicked." He dragged the body away from the road, returned to his truck, drove deeper into the desert, then came back with a shovel from the toolkit. The grave took nearly an hour to dig. The desert soil was hard and dry. Daniel buried her there, then drove Emily's car back toward the road and left it at the turnout. He had intended to hide it farther away, but the sound of a passing truck made him panic. He abandoned the vehicle quickly, left the headlights on, and drove home. By the time the missing person report was filed 2 days later, Daniel Harper had already convinced himself the secret would remain buried forever. "I thought the desert would keep it," he said quietly. For years, it had. But Alvarez knew something else still didn't fit. If Emily's accusation had been wrong, why did Daniel sound so afraid of her revealing it? "What you're telling me," Alvarez said slowly, "is that you killed your sister-in-law because of a misunderstanding." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, a strange expression crossed his face, something between regret and amusement. Then he spoke words that made the entire room feel colder. "That's what everyone will believe." Alvarez frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You asked what Emily thought she discovered." "Yes." Daniel's smile was thin. "But she was wrong about the affair." A pause. Then he whispered the truth he had hidden for 20 years. She discovered something much worse. And suddenly the motive for Emily Carter's murder no longer looked like a misunderstanding. It looked like something far darker. Something Daniel Harper had been desperate to hide, no matter the cost. The interrogation room felt colder after Daniel Harper spoke those words. She discovered something much worse. Detective Marcus Alvarez had spent years listening to suspects try to reshape the truth. Some minimized their crimes. Some twisted stories until they sounded like accidents. But Daniel's tone carried something different. Not denial. Not regret. Something closer to inevitability. Alvarez leaned forward slowly. "What did Emily discover?" Daniel looked down at the table. For a moment, it seemed like he might refuse to answer. Then he exhaled. "You ever notice how families pretend not to see things?" he said quietly. Alvarez didn't respond. Daniel continued. "Little secrets, strange behavior. People convince themselves it's nothing." The detective's voice remained calm. "Tell me what Emily found." Daniel's eyes drifted toward the recorder sitting on the table. "She went through my truck." "When?" "A few days before she died." The words landed softly, but carried enormous weight. "What did she find?" Alvarez asked. Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly. "Receipts." "What kind of receipts?" "Motels." The detective's mind began assembling possibilities. But Daniel continued before he could ask another question. "Not the kind you're thinking." Silence stretched across the room. "Emily thought I was cheating," Daniel said. "That's why she confronted me. But the truth was worse." Alvarez watched his face carefully. What was the truth? Daniel finally looked up. For the first time since the interrogation began, something like genuine shame crossed his expression. "I wasn't meeting women," he said quietly. "Then who were you meeting?" The answer came slowly. "Girls." The room froze. "You mean adult women?" Alvarez asked carefully. Daniel shook his head once. "No." The word fell into the silence, like a stone dropping into deep water. Years earlier, Emily Carter had stumbled onto something she was never meant to see. Daniel Harper had been meeting underage girls in cheap roadside motels across northern Arizona. Some he met through online chat rooms, others through friends of friends. The receipts Emily found were proof. Proof that Daniel had been living a hidden life far darker than an affair. "She told me she was going to the police," Daniel said quietly. Now the confrontation in the desert made sense. Emily had not been threatening to expose an embarrassing mistake. She had been threatening to expose a crime. "And that's when you killed her," Alvarez said. Daniel nodded slowly. "I couldn't let her destroy everything." Everything. The word hung heavily in the air. His marriage. His reputation. His freedom. Daniel Harper had decided all of it mattered more than Emily Carter's life. The argument in the desert had not been about jealousy. It had been about silence. And Daniel had chosen the most brutal way to keep it. "I didn't plan it," he said again. But the detective had heard enough confessions to know the difference between panic and decision. Daniel brought the hammer with him when he left his truck. Somewhere in that moment, he had already accepted what might happen. Emily Carter had simply refused to back down. "You buried her and went home," Alvarez said. Daniel nodded. "Next day, Laura started calling hospitals," he said quietly. "Everyone thought maybe Emily got lost somewhere. And you said nothing." What was I supposed to say? The question echoed through the small room. Daniel's voice remained strangely calm. "I thought about turning myself in once," he admitted. "When?" "A few years later." "What stopped you?" Daniel shrugged slightly. "Time. Time has a way of reshaping guilt. Days become months. Months become years. Eventually people begin convincing themselves the past belongs somewhere else." "I had a family," Daniel said. "A job. A life. A life built on top of a grave in the desert." The recorder clicked softly as the confession continued. Daniel described every step of that night again. The drive. The argument. The hammer. The silence afterward. And finally the grave. When he finished speaking, the room remained quiet for a long moment. Then Alvarez asked one final question. "Did Laura know?" Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "No." The word came quickly. "I never told her anything." For 20 years, Laura Carter had shared a home with the man who killed her sister. Completely unaware, the betrayal ran deeper than murder. It had lived beside her every day. Alvarez turned off the recorder. The confession was enough. The evidence was overwhelming. The cold case that once seemed unsolvable now had its answer. But outside the interrogation room, the consequences of that truth were just beginning. Within hours, the story exploded across local news stations. Arizona 1999 cold case solved. Family member arrested. Body found after nearly 2 decades. The quiet town that once whispered about Emily Carter's disappearance now faced a far more disturbing reality. The killer had never left. He had lived among them, worked beside them, helped search for the woman he murdered. And the person most devastated by the revelation was Laura Carter. When detectives told her the full story, she didn't speak at first. She simply sat in silence, processing the unimaginable. Her husband, her sister, the desert, 20 years of lies. Eventually she asked only one question. Did Emily suffer? The detective answered honestly. No. Laura nodded slowly. Then the tears finally came. Because some truths do not bring relief. They only replace one kind of pain with another. Emily Carter's case was no longer a mystery, but the shadow it left behind would remain in that small Arizona town forever. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are not hidden in distant places. Sometimes they sit quietly at the family dinner table, waiting, hoping, praying that no one ever discovers the truth. But secrets buried in the desert have a way of rising again. And when they do, they change everything. The desert looked the same the day Emily Carter was finally laid to rest. Endless skies stretching over the Arizona horizon. Wind moving quietly through dry grass and scattered sagebrush. The same landscape that had hidden her grave for nearly 20 years now stood silent as the truth settled over the town that had once searched for her. But nothing about the community felt the same anymore. For years, Emily's disappearance had lived in conversations as a mystery, something tragic, something unsettling, but distant enough that people could eventually return to their lives. Now that mystery had a face. Daniel Harper, the man who had stood beside them during candlelight vigils. The man who had walked across the desert calling Emily's name. The man who had eaten dinner at family gatherings, smiled in photographs, and listened quietly as Laura Carter wondered aloud what might have happened to her sister. The realization hit the town like a slow-moving shockwave. Because the most disturbing part wasn't just the crime. It was the time. 20 years. 20 years of silence. 20 years of ordinary life built on top of a secret buried beneath the desert soil. At the county courthouse weeks later, the courtroom filled quickly. Reporters lined the walls. Members of the Carter family sat together in the front row. Daniel Harper entered wearing a jail uniform, his hands cuffed in front of him. For the first time since his arrest, the two sisters' lives, one living, one gone, were about to collide inside the same room. Laura Carter sat motionless as Daniel walked past. She didn't look at him. Not once. The prosecutors laid out the case carefully. The DNA evidence inside Emily's car. The witness statement from Rachel Harper. The discovery of the grave. The hammer buried beside the body. And finally, the recorded confession. Each piece of evidence reconstructed the same story Daniel had told detectives in the interrogation room. A confrontation in the desert. A threat to reveal his crimes. A moment of rage and fear. One swing of a hammer. A life ended. Then 20 years of silence. The defense attempted to frame the killing as a moment of panic. A mistake made during an argument. But the prosecution reminded the court of what happened afterward.
The grave.
The cover-up. The lies told to investigators and family members for nearly 2 decades. Mistakes happen in seconds. But hiding a body requires decisions. And Daniel Harper made those decisions over and over again. When the time came for Laura Carter to speak, the courtroom grew quiet. She stepped forward slowly. For a moment, she simply stood there, looking down at the papers in her hands. Then she looked up. Her voice was steady. "My sister trusted you," she said. The words were directed toward Daniel. "You sat at our dinner table. You laughed with us. You hugged our mother while she cried about Emily." Laura paused. "But you already knew where she was." The room remained silent. "You didn't just take my sister's life," Laura continued quietly. "You took 20 years of answers from all of us." She stopped speaking for a moment, her voice catching in her throat. Emily deserved better than the desert. Then she stepped away. Daniel Harper never looked up during her statement. When the judge finally delivered the sentence, the decision felt inevitable. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. A punishment that arrived 20 years after the crime. For the Carter family, justice came with complicated emotions. There was closure. But closure is not the same as peace. Emily Carter's story did not end the night she disappeared in 1999. It continued through every unanswered year that followed. Every birthday she missed. Every holiday where her chair remained empty. And every moment Laura Carter spent wondering if her sister might still be alive somewhere. Now the truth had finally surfaced. But it had surfaced too late to return what was lost. Months later, a small memorial was placed near the stretch of desert road where Emily's car had once been found. The marker was simple. Just a name.
A date.
And a short message carved into the stone. She was loved. Travelers passing along the quiet road rarely notice it. The desert still looks endless. Still quiet. Still capable of hiding secrets. But somewhere beneath that vast sky lies a story the town will never forget. A story about trust. About silence. And about the dangerous weight of secrets hidden inside families. Because the truth about Emily Carter's death did not come from a stranger. It came from someone standing close enough to hear her voice. Close enough to share her life. And close enough to bury her when she refused to stay silent. For nearly 20 years, Daniel Harper believed the desert would keep that secret forever. But secrets rarely stay buried. Not in the desert. Not in families. And not in the quiet corners of cold cases waiting patiently for someone to finally listen again. Long after the trial ended, the desert remained the same. The wind still swept across the red earth. Dust still drifted over the narrow road where Emily Carter's blue sedan had once sat with its headlights glowing in the dark. Travelers still passed by without realizing that one of Arizona's most haunting cold cases had begun and ended in that quiet stretch of land. But for the people who knew the story, the desert no longer felt empty. It felt like a witness. The case that once seemed destined to remain unsolved had finally closed, yet its shadow lingered across the town for years afterward. Because solving a crime does not erase it. It only replaces questions with memories. Detective Marcus Alvarez returned to the desert once more after the trial. The investigation that had consumed months of his life was officially over. Evidence boxes were sealed again, this time labeled differently. No longer missing person. Now the file read, homicide solved. He parked his car near the old turnout where Emily's vehicle had been discovered in 1999. The road looked exactly the same as it had in the photographs taken nearly 2 decades earlier. Dry gravel. Low desert brush. A sky so wide it made everything else feel small. Standing there, Alvarez thought about the moment the truck driver had passed by Emily's car that night. The headlights still burning. The second vehicle somewhere in the darkness beyond the road. At the time, it had seemed like a strange detail. Now it felt like the beginning of the truth. The detective walked slowly across the ground toward the direction of the grave site, though the exact location had been left unmarked after the investigation ended. Nature had already begun reclaiming the disturbed soil. Within a few years, no one would be able to tell a grave had ever existed there. But Alvarez knew something important about cold cases. The evidence disappears. The land changes. But the story remains. Emily Carter had been 26 years old the night she died. Young enough that most of her life should have still been ahead of her. Friends later described her as someone who avoided conflict, someone who preferred quiet evenings and familiar routines. Which made the final decision she made that night even more powerful. Emily had discovered something wrong. Something dangerous. And instead of ignoring it, instead of protecting herself with silence, she chose to confront it. That choice cost her everything. But it also became the reason the truth eventually surfaced. Years after her death, the memory of that confrontation stayed buried inside Daniel Harper like a stone he could never fully swallow. His daughter remembered the strange comment he made while driving past the desert road. Detectives revisited the evidence. Technology found the DNA that investigators in 1999 never could have detected. And slowly, piece by piece, the silence began to break. Cold cases rarely solve themselves. They wait. They wait for new science, for new witnesses, for someone to notice a detail that once seemed too small to matter. In Emily Carter's case, the truth waited nearly 20 years. But when it surfaced, it revealed something chilling. The danger had never been far away. The person responsible for her disappearance had not fled across state lines. He had not vanished into another country. He stayed. He lived quietly among the same people who once searched the desert for Emily. He attended family gatherings, shared meals, celebrated holidays, and watched as the town slowly stopped asking questions. The most unsettling crimes are often not committed by strangers hiding in the shadows. They are committed by people standing close enough to be trusted. People who know exactly how to blend into ordinary life. Daniel Harper believed the grave he dug in the desert would protect him forever. But time has a way of turning buried secrets into unfinished stories. And unfinished stories rarely stay silent. Years after the trial, Laura Carter returned to the memorial where Emily's name had been carved into stone. The small marker stood near the roadside, simple enough that most drivers passed without noticing it. She brought flowers, not for the first time, but for the first time, she stood there without the same heavy question she had carried for 2 decades. What happened to Emily? Now she knew. The answer did not bring comfort, but it brought something else. Truth. And sometimes, after years of uncertainty, truth is the only thing left that feels solid. Laura placed the flowers beside the marker and stood quietly for a moment. The desert wind moved gently across the road. Cars passed in the distance. Life continued the way it always does. Before leaving, she read the words carved into the stone once more. Emily Carter, a name that once belonged to a missing person flyer. A name that once belonged to a cold case file gathering dust on a shelf. Now it belonged to a story the town would never forget. A story about trust, betrayal, and the terrible cost of secrets hidden inside families. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, the desert returned to its familiar silence. But somewhere within that silence lived the echo of a truth that refused to stay buried. A reminder that even the quietest places can hold the darkest stories. And that sometimes, after years of waiting, the past finds its way back into the light.